Hey guys, welcome to today's analysis. It's obviously Tuesday, November 13th, and we're getting right about to the end of the day here. And so today's analysis, I just want to cover a few major pairs, and they're actually all US dollar crosses. And the reason I want to do that is because the US dollar is actually a relatively neutral pair if you consider the last week or 2 weeks. It's pretty neutral overall. Now today had a pretty strong day, but I'm talking about the last few weeks. And so what that does when you have a neutral currency like that, it allows you to evaluate some of the other major currencies, all of them against that currency, to kind of give you a view. So in other words, if the US dollar is neutral and the euro is rising against it and the pound's falling against it, that gives you a better idea of the strength of the euro and the pound because you're comparing it to the same neutral currency. So hopefully that makes sense. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to cover the euro dollar, the pound dollar, the AUD dollar, and the US dollar CAD. So all four US dollar currencies, but there's some interesting things to note in all of them, and I think that it'll give us a good idea of where those other three currencies besides the US dollar are at, and I think there's some good trade potential in all of those. Okay, so we're going to get into those four major currency pairs today, and I'd love to get your feedback on all of them. Before we jump into those, let's take a quick look at our news so we kind of have an idea of what to expect based on that, and then also we're going to get into our terms and just cover those quickly before we get into the charts. Okay. Alright guys, and if you notice, tomorrow we have a big clump of red tag news, 5:30 and 8:30 a.m. news. And if you'll notice, one of those is pound and one of those is dollar, which of course are two of the currencies that we're going to be talking about today. So when we talk about the pound, I'm going to let you know kind of what I'm seeing as far as downward and upward potential. And then the US dollar, again, we're going to be looking at a lot because it's in every one of the pairs that we're going to be covering. So, PPI and retail sales should both be big, but the biggest announcement is probably going to be the FOMC meetings tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern. So some major US dollar news, and I said right now the US dollar is pretty neutral, but obviously with a lot of those major news announcements, that could change pretty quickly. But nonetheless, those are our major news announcements in that 5:30 to 8:30 clump, and then 2 p.m. as well. And all of those, of course, red tagged events can have a big effect on the market. So I want to keep an eye open for those as we trade tomorrow. Okay, then as I said, let's hit our terms real quick. And basically, the terms just say that we're not licensed or qualified to provide investment advice, and that the daily analysis is just something that we do as an educational resource for our subscribers and our readers and our visitors. Okay, so please do understand that, and if you need to read through these terms, you can pause the video and read through them thoroughly if you need to understand those better. All right, let's get into those charts and cover those four major pairs that we talked about. The euro dollar, of course, is the first one that we always tend to look at, and a few major things to note with the euro dollar. Number one, it is kind of slowing down here. Obviously, still making bearish movement overall, but you can see that over the past few days it started to slow down. And so we're at a level here as well that is worth paying attention to. I'm not, calling a major bounce of the euro right now, but it is at a level and it is slowing down. So a bounce back up to test this level, or even maybe not quite that far, but a bounce of some kind before a continuation would not be surprising here. And that's something that you want to keep an eye out for on the euro. Now, if it breaks right through here with strong momentum tomorrow based on news and just technical continuation, then more shorts will be in order because there's not another major resistance level until probably 123.5 or in that area, which is a decent amount of movement. Okay, so the euro dollar, again, a little bit of upside potential here, although I wouldn't be going long even if it does begin to bounce. I'll probably be looking for shorts after the bounce, but also some downside, some bearish trade potential if it just continues right away, because to me that would tend to usher in a continuation down to the next major level. Okay, so that's what I'm paying attention to on the euro, and the pound is somewhat similar, as I'll show you, but there's also a major difference there. So let me go ahead and show you that. So obviously the similarity with the pound dollar is that we're showing downward consistency and that it is moving down. Now what's different that you'll see about the pound is that there's a little more a valid trend to consider, whereas the euro has just broken down through a major level. It hasn't really had many bounces to the upside and continuations like we see here on the pound has a very consistent trend line in play. And so one thing to note is that if you draw kind of from the last two lows and then keep this one in mind, we are probably getting near the point where you'd expect a pound dollar bounce, back to the upside here. So again, this only touches 2 points, so it's not exactly a solid trend line that should be respected. But just if you're short on the pound dollar, do be wary of a bounce here, because it's not, it won't be surprising if this comes up for another test of our trend line here, because the trend line has been a magnet for price so far. It continues to come up and touch that area before moving down to lower lows. So continue to keep an eye on the pound if you are short on that already, and be watchful of this bounce, because this range is a pretty large range, and that's a lot of pips to lose if you're short on the pound. So that's the main thing I'd pay attention to there. And then of course we do have this major level in play, which is one that I've been expecting for a while, that price is going to get down to that level and test it eventually. Obviously we're not quite there yet. If one more bounce does happen and continuation from the top of this trend line back to the downside occurs, then you're probably looking at an almost guarantee of it coming back to touch this level if there's one more bounce. So that's what's going on in the pound. A lot of bearishness, obviously, but do be ready for a bounce that won't be surprising there. Okay, next let's take a look at the AUD dollar. Okay, so the AUD is a little bit different, because the AUD's actually moving up against the dollar, whereas the euro and the pound are moving down against the dollar, which is kind of what I was talking about with the US dollar neutral. Some are moving up, some are moving down. Obviously, the euro over the past week or two has crashed, while the AUD has continued to move pretty consistently to the upside. What's interesting about the AUD is that even though we had a strong bounce from yesterday's bar and expected some upward movement, today started off with a pretty hard move back to the downside as a retest, before finishing up as this nice little push bar that we have now back to the upside. And when you look at the AUD, obviously you have a few major things to look at. Number one, we have this little wedge, this mini upward wedge it's forming, where the top of this trend line is probably a good area to target if you're long. But you also have this major downward level that you expect price to get to and test eventually, and that's in play. So those are the two major levels as AUD moves up that you're going to want to pay attention to. And of course, if for some reason a strong burst of AUD came and broke through this level, then you're talking about some serious long-term AUD dollar bullish momentum, and that will be something that really catches my eye, because this is a very long-term level that we're looking at. So those are the kind of the major things that I'm paying attention to on the AUD. I think that the AUD has a lot of bullish potential in it, but when it gets to this level, you have to expect some kind of bounce back to the downside, again, because of the authority and longevity of that line. So that just, that really, warns me to be careful with long positions, because any type of level that has that much, authority and long-term, respect, so to speak, in it, is one that makes me want to be careful around it if I'm going in the opposite direction of the level, which in this case a long would be. Okay, so that's the AUD dollar. A few major levels there, and a watch for a break is also a critical thing to keep in mind. And then the last pair we're going to touch on is the USD CAD, so let's go there. Okay, and so just the main thing to note here is that the USD CAD is still moving up since its break. I know we talked about this when it first broke, and we talked about the long potential here. Had a pretty steep, pullback here where the tail came all the way back down to 98.70, but is now right near the tops here, trying to make a higher high, it looks like, and propel its way up towards 102 or even higher. And that's something I definitely want to keep in mind, because if the US dollar continues to make ground against the CAD, you're talking about long-term targets in place here, like even all the way up to 104 with continued momentum. So that's obviously a pretty big target to think about, and if it's going to go there, I don't want to miss the opportunity to ride that train as it moves. CAD has been historically pretty strong, and at least held the US dollar in check even when the US dollar is strong, but a reversal and a rally of that US dollar is certainly something that I don't want to miss if it's going to move up. Okay, so that's about it for the for the US dollar. That's about all we talked about. That's about it for the daily analysis today, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'm sorry if I didn't cover some of the pairs that you wanted to cover today, but I'll try to get into more of those tomorrow. Okay, guys, thanks again for watching, and I will certainly talk to you soon.